Before you scroll, let me ask you something real. When was the last time you woke up excited about your work? Not the paycheck, not the title, but the actual life you're building. If your answer feels uncomfortable, stay with me. Because the shift from employee to entrepreneur doesn't start with money, ideas, or luck. It starts with a quiet but radical change in how you see yourself. Most people are trained to be safe before they're trained to be free. From a young age, we're taught to follow instructions, meet expectations, and wait for permission. Get good grades, get a stable job. Don't take unnecessary risks. And for a long time, that system works. You get a routine, you get certainty, you get a sense of control. But what it doesn't give you is ownership. And deep down, ownership is what your mind is craving. As an employee, your value is measured by how well you execute someone else's vision. Your time is sliced into hours, your effort converted into a fixed salary, your creativity filtered through approval. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, it's honorable work. But the danger begins when you confuse stability with fulfillment. When you mistake comfort for growth. When you slowly accept that this is as far as life goes. The entrepreneurial mindset begins the moment you stop asking, "What do they want from me?" and start asking, "What do I want to build?" That question can feel terrifying because it removes the safety net. No clear roadmap, no guaranteed outcome, no boss to blame, just you and your decisions. And that's exactly why most people never make the shift. Not because they're incapable, but because responsibility is heavier than it looks. Employees are paid to avoid mistakes. Entrepreneurs are paid because they survive them. That's a fundamental difference. When you work a job, mistakes are punished. When you build something, mistakes are tuition. You don't escape failure. You learn how to use it. And the first mental shift is accepting that failure is not a personal flaw. It's a process requirement. Another shift happens with time. Employees trade time for money. Entrepreneurs build systems that work when they don't. This doesn't mean working less in the beginning. In fact, it often means working more, but with a different intention. You stop asking how many hours you work today and start asking what value you created. Value compounds, hours don't. Then there's identity. This is where it gets uncomfortable. As an employee, your identity is often handed to you. Job titled, company name, position. As an entrepreneur, your identity is self-defined. And when results don't show up immediately, self-doubt gets loud. You'll question whether you're smart enough, fast enough, good enough. That voice is normal. It's not a signal to stop. It's a signal that you're leaving the familiar. You also stop waiting to be chosen. Entrepreneurs don't wait for promotions, approvals, or validation. They choose themselves. They launch before they feel ready. They speak before they're confident. They act before the fear disappears because it never fully does. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to move with it in the room. Money changes meaning too. A paycheck feels safe because it's predictable. Entrepreneurial income feels dangerous because it's earned, not guaranteed. But over time, you realize something powerful. Predictable income is not the same as secure income. True security comes from skill, adaptability, and the ability to create value in any environment. Once your mind understands that, it never goes back. This shift doesn't require quitting your job tomorrow. It requires quitting the belief that someone else is responsible for your future. It requires seeing problems as opportunities, learning as leverage, and ownership as the ultimate form of freedom. The moment you internalize that, you've already stepped out of the employee mindset, even if your job title hasn't changed yet. And here's the truth most people won't tell you. The hardest part isn't learning business. It's unlearning permission, unlearning fear-based thinking, unlearning the idea that your dreams need to fit inside someone else's system. Once that mental door opens, everything else becomes possible. Once your mind breaks away from the need for permission, you begin to notice how deeply conditioned most thinking really is. You'll hear people say things like, "That's too risky," or "Be realistic," or "At least this job is stable." What they're really saying is, "Don't challenge the story I'm living in, because if you do, I'll have to question my own choices." Entrepreneurship forces you to confront narratives you've been protected from your entire life. You start realizing that safety is often an illusion maintained by repetition. Doing the same thing every day feels secure not because it is, but because it's familiar. The paycheck arrives on schedule, but your control over it doesn't exist. One decision above you can erase years of loyalty. That realization isn't meant to scare you. It's meant to wake you up. When you see it clearly, you stop outsourcing your sense of security to systems you don't own. Your relationship with learning changes completely. As an employee, learning is optional, sometimes even inconvenient. As an entrepreneur, learning becomes oxygen. You don't learn to impress. You learn to survive and scale. Every new skill has a direct impact on your income, your confidence, and your freedom. Sales, communication, negotiation, psychology. These stop being abstract concepts and become daily tools. The gap between who you are and who you need to become becomes obvious, and instead of avoiding it, you lean in. You also begin to understand leverage. Employees rely on effort, entrepreneurs rely on leverage. Leverage can be capital, systems, media, code, teams, or audience. But most importantly, it's clarity of thinking. When you think clearly, you make fewer emotional decisions. When you make fewer emotional decisions, you waste less time. Time saved compounds into opportunity. Opportunity compounds into growth. Another uncomfortable truth appears. Motivation is unreliable. Employees are motivated by structure, deadlines, bosses, reviews. Entrepreneurs can't wait to feel motivated. They build discipline instead. They act even when the excitement fades, because consistency outperforms passion every single time. This is where many people quit, not because the dream isn't real, but because the novelty wore off and discipline wasn't ready to replace it. Your environment starts to matter more than ever. Who you listen to, what content you consume, what conversations you entertain. Entrepreneurship sharpens your awareness of influence. You realize that average thinking is contagious. So is ambition. You become selective, not arrogant, focused, not isolated. You protect your mental bandwidth because you finally understand its value. There's also a shift in how you handle pressure. As an employee, pressure comes from external expectations. As an entrepreneur, pressure comes from internal standards. There's no one telling you to show up. You show up because you know what happens if you don't. That kind of pressure can feel heavy, but it also builds self-trust. Every promise you keep to yourself strengthens your identity, and identity drives behavior. You stop chasing quick wins and start respecting long games. Overnight success loses its appeal when you understand how fragile it is. You begin building things that last. Brands, skills, reputations. You trade instant gratification for momentum. And momentum, once it starts, is hard to stop. Fear doesn't disappear, but it evolves. Early on, you fear failing. Later, you fear playing too small. You fear wasting potential. You fear looking back and realizing you had the ability, but not the courage. That fear becomes fuel instead of friction. It sharpens your decisions. It keeps you honest. And somewhere in the middle of all this, something subtle but powerful happens. You stop seeing yourself as someone trying entrepreneurship and start seeing yourself as someone who creates value. That identity shift is irreversible. Even if a project fails, even if an idea doesn't work, you no longer doubt your capacity to build again. You've crossed a mental line most people never do. At that point, success stops being a destination and becomes a byproduct, not of hustle, but of alignment between how you think, how you act, and what you're willing to take responsibility for. The final shift is the most profound one, and it's rarely talked about. You stop measuring progress by external validation and start measuring it by internal standards. Likes, applause, titles, and recognition lose their power over you. What replaces them is something far more valuable: self-respect. You respect yourself because you do hard things without being watched, because you move forward even when no one is cheering, because you don't abandon your vision when the results are late. You realize that entrepreneurship is not a career path. It's a personal development path disguised as business. Every weakness gets exposed: impatience, ego, fear, lack of focus. You can't hide behind a role anymore. The business becomes a mirror, and it reflects exactly who you are. At first, that can feel brutal, but then it becomes liberating. Because if the problem is you, the solution is also you. Your definition of freedom matures. In the beginning, freedom looks like money and time. Later, it looks like choice and control. The ability to say no, the ability to walk away, the ability to design your days instead of surviving them. You understand that real freedom is not doing whatever you want. It's doing what matters, without asking permission. You also develop patience most people never cultivate. You learn to sit with uncertainty without panicking, to make decisions without having all the answers, to trust your ability to adapt instead of your ability to predict. This patience isn't passive, it's active confidence. The kind that says, "I'll figure it out," and actually means it. Comparison fades. You stop looking sideways because you're too focused on your own trajectory. You understand that someone else's chapter has nothing to do with yours. Speed stops impressing you. Direction does. You'd rather move slowly in the right direction than fast toward a life you don't want. That clarity alone puts you ahead of most people. Responsibility becomes empowering instead of heavy. When everything is your fault, everything is also within your influence. You no longer wait for conditions to be perfect. You move with what you have. You build with what's available. You adjust in real time. Progress becomes inevitable because you're no longer dependent on external circumstances to begin. There's a quiet confidence that develops over time. Not loud, not performative. It comes from knowing you can survive discomfort. From knowing you can rebuild if needed. From knowing your value isn't tied to a single role, company, or idea. That confidence changes how you speak, how you negotiate, how you walk into rooms. People feel it before you say a word. You also become more generous, with knowledge, with opportunity, with perspective. Not because you have to, but because you remember what it felt like to be at the beginning. Entrepreneurship, when done right, expands you. It doesn't just increase income, it increases capacity. Emotional capacity, mental capacity, vision. At some point, you look back at the version of yourself who was afraid to step outside the employee mindset, and you don't judge them. You thank them because they had the courage to question the script, to pause and ask, is this really it? That question was the turning point, not the business idea, not the investment, the question. And here's the truth that ties everything together. Becoming an entrepreneur is not about escaping work. It's about choosing your struggle. You're trading one set of limitations for another, but this time the limits are self-imposed, and that makes all the difference. You're no longer living inside someone else's definition of success. If you're standing at that mental crossroads right now, unsure, uncomfortable, but curious, understand this. You don't need to have everything figured out. You just need to decide who gets to define your future. The moment you choose yourself, the mindset shift is already complete.